Okay? Yeah.
All right. Everybody hear me? I hope so. All right, to the select company in the room today, you know who I am.
We can hear him.
Okay,
Does the microphone work?
is the microphone on or?
I'd have to run to the back to turn that microphone on.
Okay.
Can you handle that?
I'm not sure.
Here, just hold this. I'll go turn it on.
All right, thank you.
No problem, sir.
All right, so you all know who I am. We're gonna share this with people later. So, as they used to say to all the ships in sea, my name is David Ensley. And 17 years ago, I had the honor of marrying into the Piersall family, at which time I gained a father-in-law named Steve, who is the man we're here to honor today. A couple years earlier, I went on a first date with Cheryl Piersall. And it went so well that I was very eager for a second meeting. And it was midweek, so we had to arrange around each other's work schedules. But that Tuesday evening worked out for both of us. And though she was in the process of cleaning out her office of her private PT practice that didn't quite get off the ground, well, I was happy to be there to help her out. And because it was me, I arrived about 45 minutes late. And by the time we made it there, her father was already in the parking lot, having already emptied out most of the equipment on his own. My first impression of Steve Piersall was a man with blonde hair falling out of his ponytail, a cigarette hanging from his lip, staring daggers at his daughter, saying, "Yeah, I've been here for 45 minutes. I started on my own." She briefly introduced us. I got a firm handshake that rearranged several of the bones in my hand, and I kind of thought I just met a crazy person. But I learned pretty quickly how wrong I was. He was a man of several common phrases, which he delivered when the situation called for it. One phrase, which described people that we may not have known all that well, he'd say, "Oh, let me tell you about him. He'll give you the shirt off his back." And that describes Steve to a T. And I can only hope I can return the favor in the words I speak today. I only knew Steve for about a third of his life, so today's recollection is limited to what I experienced and what the extended family shared with me. But as someone who experienced a similar loss when I was younger, I hope that as a family, we will never stop sharing the memories of the man, the brother, the father, and the grandfather that he was to each of us. Stephen Robert Piersall was born to Henry and Helen Piersall in 1951, the brother of Gail. I've heard very few stories from his youth, and most of the details were vague. I know a particular photo where baby Stephen was meeting with Santa Claus for maybe the first time, and Gail had a dutiful smile across her face, but Steve's eyes were locked onto those of Kris Kringle. He was either terrified or didn't believe what he was seeing. Those eyes never changed over the years. If he saw something he didn't quite believe, he'd look you straight in the eye and let you know about it. Following high school, he enlisted in the Air Force and most memorably served in Greenland. When Cheryl and I took a vacation to Iceland a few years back and we pointed out that we went whale watching a mere 30 miles south of the Arctic Circle, he was quick to come back with, "Oh, excuse me, let me know when you spend a few months north of it." Now let's talk about that phrase, "excuse me." Steve had a few catchphrases that he was quick to introduce into conversation at a moment's notice. Most frequently, if you were talking about something he didn't quite agree with, the first interjection was, "Excuse me." Your next step was a brief rebuttal, but that was usually met with, "I got news for you." You were then free to present additional evidence, but you were probably met with, "I don't want to point this out." And if you made it that far, state your case any further, he probably conceded the point and, one of those things. And that was the end of the topic. Regardless, Steve's time in the Air Force is notable for two things: his appreciation of a breakfast of chipped beef on toast, affectionately known as SOS, which got a young Cheryl in a little bit of trouble when she described it in elementary school. And an encounter with a young woman named Lois Derbyshire to get together in South Jersey. I more than once asked for details about that first meeting, but the most common phrase I heard was, we met on the floor of the coat closet. I got nothing to add to that. It must have made an impression on both of them because they married shortly after they turned 21 and began a partnership that lasts for 50 years and affect every one of us here today. I've seen photos from his Air Force days, and they show an impressive contrast with the Steve Piersall of recent years. His hair was sharply parted, his mustache was trimmed with military precision, and as someone who's about 6 weeks overdue for a haircut, I can appreciate the unique Steve Piersall ponytail that persisted to this day. He went from the late 70s, where he kind of looked like Bill Murray, to someone that probably the first person you noticed in a crowd, whether you were looking at him or just hearing him. Then again, Steve was a man who was always evolving. From the Stephen Robert that he was to his parents and sister, he became Steve to his wife Lois. When his daughters arrived, he became dad or daddy. And years later, when grandchildren became to take the scene, he became papa. Inadvertently, he was responsible for a new name for his wife as well. His first grandson, Hunter, who was very observant as a toddler, began imitating his papa whenever he called his grandma. If Papa knew her as Honey, well, that was good enough for Hunter. And Julian and Kylie followed the tradition on their own. But on those lines, Steve's devotion to his family couldn't be questioned. When someone needed him, he dropped everything. He made sure he was there for them. When Cheryl and I were early in our relationship and we stumbled across a house we were considering buying, he was there within minutes, analyzing the construction techniques from the basement to the attic. And we honestly wished that our building inspector had been half as thorough. And when Donna was expecting her first child, he and Lois rearranged their lives. They found a new house where they could all live safely and comfortably together. But he would never admit outwardly to be such a sentimental person. When Cheryl and I were moving into our house and carrying an assortment of bulky possessions, I managed to corner him, and I made the formal request for his daughter's hand in marriage because I knew that he appreciated traditions. His immediate response was, I'll try to do this, and he lit a cigarette. But about 20 minutes later, the whole family was together, the context was lost in the distant past, and out of the blue he blurted out, oh, by the way, the answer's no. But that was him. He was stoic in the moments that affected himself, but his heart was on his sleeve when it accepted other people. The running joke that surrounded him involved paper towels. There were two separate incidents. Once when Cheryl was a little girl, and there was a mishap in the garage with a table saw. And once a few years ago involving an axe, as he was chopping wood and needed Honey's help suddenly. And in each case, the response was, can you bring me some paper towels? Thankfully, I've never had one of my own because I don't think I would have reacted so calmly. But if it was a member of his family, it was the opposite. When Lois was recovering from a horrible car accident, when she later had heart bypass surgery and vein reconstructive surgery in her foot, he was with her every day, even after a full day of work, and he helped her get back on her feet every time. When Cheryl had eye surgery, dozens of eye appointments in the years that followed, he drove her to and from each appointment, listened to every worry and fear that she had, and brought her home whether it was at 4:30 or 9:30 p.m. As Donna went through 3 pregnancies, some of which were more stressful than others, he stood by her side. As each baby entered the world, he was the first person on the phone sharing the news to everyone. But he was a tough nut to crack. You can't summarize him easily. He was one of a kind. I've often tried to figure out what he and I might have had in common, and one thing I can think of is that we've both made an effort to stay a big kid at heart. Because even if life makes sure that we have to grow up, find those things where you can just still be a kid and enjoy things. A few years back, I needed a new computer, and he told me he could buy all the individual parts and build it himself. And over the span of a few weeks, every time I went to the house, there was a few more boxes on the floor, but he wouldn't open them. When the last one arrived, you would have thought that it was Christmas morning. He pulled it apart and said, "Oh, will you look at this motherboard? Well, if you have this much RAM to get things done, you're going to be fine. And this processor, I don't know what he's talking about, but it was important to him." And when it was done, I had a top-notch machine on my hands. And during Hurricane Sandy, when I was working from home, I made sure to let all my coworkers know that I couldn't have done it without what my father-in-law had done for me. And he brought that same passion to a lot of other things. Cooking, whether it was a breakfast at SOS, lunch at Salisbury Steak, a multi-course holiday dinner. He dove into everything with focus. And no matter how simple or complicated, when it was over, soup! That was the announcement that everybody was time to come to dinner. And then he had his grill, he was very serious about his grill. And Cheryl threw me a 40th birthday party. I showed up. It was a surprise. Everybody was looking straight at me except for him. He had his back because he was working the grill. But that big kid made sure to pass things along to his daughters. He had his nightly routines with Cheryl, watching The Muppet Show, listening to John Denver and Simon and Garfunkel, and they both agreed. Paul was a great songwriter, but without Art's vocals, it just wouldn't have been the same. They watched their Star stuff, Star Trek and Star Wars. We all had a couple dates as a trio, seeing the prequels and reboots over the years. His evenings with a young Donna involved episodes of Knight Rider. He showed her E.T. for the first time, probably before she was ready, and as she was bawling her eyes out, she's fine. And while she was learning to drive, he took the place of a missing traffic cone so that Donna could continue to practice her parallel parking, which that's the very definition of bravery. There were trips to the beach, cruises, Disney World, kites, trains, trips to the Dover Downs casino and buffet and blackjack tables. And as recently as last year, he was still running down water slides with his grandson, Julian, as they vacationed in Wildwood. I have often said that one of the great unfairnesses of life is that we actually have to grow up. So I'm glad that he appreciated that those moments when you didn't have to be a grown-up were all that matters. But here we are. We have to say goodbye, whether we're ready or we aren't. Last week, 2 days after he passed, Cheryl and I were catching up on the final episode of the latest Star Stuff series, Star Trek Picard. And in the episode, the topic was mortality. Spoiler alert, but Jean-Luc Picard found himself being kept preserved in a computer simulation with that of Mr. Data, the android who had been lost for 20 years. And Picard was being given a second chance. But Data didn't want that. Data requested that as he left, he turn off the program so that Data could press on himself. And after the episode ended, Cheryl asked that I write down what Mr. Data said because it seemed pretty important at the time. He said, "I want to live, however briefly, knowing that my life is finite. Mortality gives meaning to human life. Peace, love, friendship, these are precious because we know they cannot endure. The butterfly that lives forever is not really a butterfly at all." But this isn't a simulation, this is our reality. We have to figure out how to keep on going. When Dawn and the kids went to visit Steve a few weeks back, following a hospital visit, bringing the dog Brownie back to them, she took a photo as they drove away. It's on the poster board over there. He's standing in the distance, a mask covering half his face, with his hair overflowing at the top in every direction. His eyes are wide as he smiles at the camera. His arm is extended like this. And knowing the selection of phrases he regularly used, I have no doubt that he was exclaiming, "Arrivederci!" And that's where we are. We have to say goodbye. Steve, please send our love to Henry and Helen, to Thomas and Madeline, to Amy, whose time on this earth was way too short. If you run into my mother, I'm sure you have plenty of stories to share. Keep it brief. And please let our furry little friends, Garfield, Oreo, Simba Jean, Izzy and Bob, let them know we miss them as well. And we shall miss you, Steve and Robert. Steve, Daddy, Papa. Arrivederci. Cheryl had a song, I totally forgot about it. It'll take 5 minutes. Here you go.